Hello, leaders. It's Arlene Smith, and welcome back. I'm so glad that you're here. Well, actually, I'm super excited that you're here because it shows that you're like 100% committed to wanting to help your workforce heal their hearts from everything they experience every single day. And you know why you're doing this, right? It's for them to come back and do it all over again. And that really comes from a place of having an exemplary leader who is committed to working with your team members to give them the opportunities and the experience to be led by somebody who's extraordinary. So I thought today's podcast, I would dedicate it completely on one of the areas of leadership where I see the most fumbles, and it's all in the communication. You know this. When you think about the importance of communication, again, there are failures every single day in the way we communicate. And I want to believe personally that this comes from a place where we're really just not like tuned in and thinking about what needs to happen, what needs to be said, how we're going to say it, and how it's received, right? We are just rushing around and we're really focused just more on just making sure we're getting that message out. And I'm here to tell you, I was guilty of this myself before I did all of this development when it came to being an exemplary leader. It's 100% possible when you know where to focus on. So I want to talk about some of those communication traps, and I want to talk about it from the lens of being in healthcare and really what it means for the individual, for the person that you are leading, and how just making some minor tweaks are really going to help you be at a place where your communications are going to land where they need to. And again, I'm here to remind you, while you're here in life school, this is all about learning through practice. You're doing it over and over and over again to get to mastery. And I know what you're thinking, but Arlene, it is just so hard to do because I'm dealing with people, and I get it. You're 100% right, but don't beat yourself up. You absolutely have the potential to be able to do this. So let's talk about some of these traps because, again, I think as a leader, one of the things that I see probably that is one of the causes of these traps is really our inability as leaders to really be thinking about things from a strategic perspective. Again, as a leader, you have to develop the skills and the competencies to be able to look forward in time. That is a core leadership competency. It is 100% within your control. And I'm going to remind you, when you are doing this, when you're looking at things from this lens of stepping back and stepping up and really looking at what are the things you want to accomplish, it's as simple as really breaking things down into smaller chunks. You're not going to be able to do everything, but if you don't have any strategic plan, you're going to find yourself just constantly being in this state where you're just moving about and you're really not making any progress. So I always like to remind people, listen, this is why the windshield of the front of your car is enormous. It's so you can see forward, and you have that tiny little rear view mirror that you look up and glance at, and your side mirrors just to look behind you and on your blind spots to see how you're progressing. I mean, how do you think you would drive if all you did was spend all your time looking in the rearview mirror or your side mirrors? You would crash into whoever was in front of you. Of course that would happen. So you have to have this ability to be thinking ahead. And I always tell leaders, I know for me, this was a core competency that I had to learn. I had a great mentor, and I will tell you her name was Catherine. She used to do this magically. She had just had this very natural ability to look at sort of the world from a lens of where she wanted to be and in those phases and stages, right? And for me, I will tell you the easiest way to break this out if you're new to this or you're struggling with this or you're not consistent with this is really to break things out into manageable quarters, right? So in this quarter, these are my priorities. The next quarter, this is what I'm doing. But I want to have a look back to make sure that I'm seeing sustainability. And so I want to talk about that because I think that failure in not having sort of a strategic picture is where we see all these traps come in. And they happen pretty much in a lot of places in healthcare. So let's talk about some of them. I feel like one of the biggest struggles I see that leaders do when they're delivering their communications is the messaging is unclear or it's ambiguous. And what do I mean by that? It means that there is a failure in sort of articulating sort of the vision, the goals, the outcomes, like the expectations clearly and concisely for everybody to really understand. And I see this sometimes as a trap where what happens is because we're not slowing down enough to make sure that that messaging is perfect and we're rushing, what winds up happening is sometimes we can beat it around the bush a lot. And we talk about a whole bunch of things and people sort of leave thinking, now, what am I supposed to be doing? I don't have a clear picture. And so that is a huge trap when it comes to leadership. So make sure when you're looking at your communications, you're really focusing in on those, the way you're delivering. Is it clear? Is it concise? And I will tell you, this is a constant struggle for me. I work on this all the time. I tend to be wordy. Fortunately, right now, the boss that I have, the chief nurse that I work under, she's amazing. She has this natural ability. And so oftentimes I'll submit education and she'll help me sort of make sure it's as concise and manageable as possible. So that happens, right, to all of us. We're all growing here in life school and we're all building our core skills. So another trap that I see when it comes to communication is as leaders, sometimes we have this lack of an ability to really show and be present and be participatory in active listening. And I know what you're thinking. That is not me. It's pretty much everybody. I mean, we are missing opportunities right and left every single time because I know for sure what I see in leadership is we have a perspective that we want to make sure is heard. And when someone is communicating to us, what are we doing instead of listening to that person and being present and creating that psychological safe space for them to share their viewpoints? We are crafting up in our minds what we're going to say and how we're going to rebut, reframe, or reshape that message that we want to get to them. That is what most leaders do. So I'm going to remind you here in Life School, a big part of your leadership journey, especially when it comes to healthcare workers, is just making sure you're working on those active listening skills. And if you're not doing this well with your workforce, then what kind of role model are you for them to do it with their patients and their families? I mean, are they really going to be listening to the concerns? Are they really going to be present and paying attention? Or are they making sort of their list for Target shopping after they go to work? You just don't know. So you have to be present and you've got to make sure that people are engaged in really good conditions around active listening. It is so critically important. And I'm also going to remind you, an area that's a trap when it comes to leadership is our ability as leaders sometimes to be very inconsistent with our communications. And again, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to always advocate that you get into a regular routine of thinking about what you're going to say before you say it. And that means sometimes just slowing down your pace and building in those natural pauses where you can think about for 3 seconds how you're going to frame that communication out so that the tone hits where it needs to be and that it lands in the way that you want it to do. And why is that so important? Well, you know this as a leader. If you land communication poorly, like if you haven't given that safe space to be able to allow someone to hear what you're trying to say, and you are rushing and you're not slowing down and you're just shooting things off, I guarantee you, you are losing credibility. I mean, I kind of feel like what happens a lot in healthcare is that it's sort of like, you're losing like the 9 lives of a cat. You lose a little life there and another little life. Like literally people get to a point where they just say, that's it, enough's enough. I can't take it anymore, right? And so some of this work that you have to do here as a leader in life school is really just being self-aware of your own habits, your own practices, your own opportunities and areas to develop. And I will tell you, I saw this all the time when I did a lot of consulting. I do a lot of consulting now. It's a little bit more clinical in nature, so it's a little different, but for leadership consulting, it is no different. People really struggle with having those difficult conversations. And what do I mean by that? Well, number one, they avoid them. So you will see that very often. That is a normal behavior. Like instead of having that conversation because I'm not sure how I'm going to phrase it or state it or address it, and I don't really know how that person's going to take it, I'm just going to avoid it altogether. And that happens so much in healthcare. So ignoring it does not make it go away magically. You know this. It just creates more stress, and it really reinforces this idea that you are unclear in your expectation setting. It allows those issues to fester and to just find a place where they just get worse and worse and worse until you really got to deal with it. And so having those conversations and working on those communications, the best advice that I can give you as a leader is, again, I think of my dear friend, Jen. She was my work BFF for so many years. We worked alongside of each other as core leaders learning together. And one of the things that I love that she taught me that she would do is she would say, Arlene, I have to, write these conversations out and have talking points to guide me because you and I are different. You can go on the fly. I need to have structure. So I'm going to remind you as a leader, know your strengths, work from a place of strengths. But I loved it how Jen had this way of sort of outlining her points, and she would do her preparation before those difficult conversations. And that prep time, that little extra time that she would build in to make sure that message was being delivered in the right way, always landed her in a place where it built her confidence up because she absolutely was able to have those conversations and keep it structured even if things were happening. So don't be embarrassed to put things in your notebook or even create an outline and glue it in or tape it into a notebook and have it in front of you when you're having some of those tough conversations, because again, those are hard to do. And if you're struggling with, should I put in the effort? Should I really try to get mastery in this skill around having difficult conversations? I'm going to remind you, your team members have to do it every day. Those healthcare workers, they have to have difficult conversations every single day. I mean, if you've ever tried to do any type of care delivery with somebody that has a sort of a fixed mindset or is unwilling to work with you, you have to have some tough conversations. There were many times in my career as a nurse where I had to have very difficult conversations. And it was a lot of the work that I did on learning this as an art and getting to mastery where it just made it easier and better. So I know just from a nursing education perspective, I think we need a lot of work just on communication and making sure people can have those conversations with confidence and be able to make sure they're doing their prep so it lands in a way. And for you sometimes to do those difficult conversations, I'm going to remind you, it really means you as a leader have to practice being an expert noticer. I mean, you've got to look at your surroundings. You've got to be looking at how people are responding, how people are taking those messages. And if you're doing all the talking and you're not asking them, what are your thoughts about what I just said? When you think about what we just discussed, what are those things that you heard that you want to take forward and you want to begin to work on and make better? Right? I mean, those are ways to validate that what you're saying is actually being heard. And so I think one of the strategies that I learned very early in my leadership career was that one where it was very, very simple. If I'm hearing you correctly, right? If I'm hearing you correctly, like just memorize that one over and over again. So when you're delivering a message and someone's communicating it back to you, if I'm hearing you correctly, you are saying ... right? And that's your chance to validate. So if somebody is not hearing it correctly, right? I always used to love to say to somebody, we talked about a lot of things today during our one-on-one and during that scheduled time. When you think about it, what are the top 3 things that you're going to walk away with? And what are you interested in doing when it comes to that communication that you heard, right? And so that really helps people. I truly believe sometimes it really helps people just shift and think about, what did I hear? And what was the order that I heard it? And for you, again, it's a chance to validate, right? So if somebody repeats things back to you and you're like, that's not what we discussed, right? I want to clarify that. That really is just an opportunity for you to do that. So I want to talk about another trap that I see a lot when it comes to leadership. And again, I think, this is our ability as leaders, like this is a failure sometimes where we are not adapting our communication styles to the different approaches for the people that we provide care to, right? So your team members, you understand this. They are all unique individuals. I mean, nobody's the same. That means the way you communicate to them, you may need to adapt to meet their needs. And if you're that type of person where you're like, that's too much work, I'm going to tell you, you're not going to get people to greatness. And the best part about your time here in life school as a leader in healthcare is if you're that leader that you can inspire greatness and you can get people to fulfill their purpose and achieve their highest potential. Trust me, when you lay your head down at night, you are going to feel so fulfilled, like everything that you've worked for in your entire career is worth it all. Because if it just impacted one person and it made them do things differently, then it is a win for the field of healthcare. Because you just grew your talent. You invested in the people that are wired to care, and you, just by the way you interacted in your communications with them, you landed it, and you landed it well, and you inspired them to want to continue to be great and to do the work they were designed to do. So another trap that I see sometimes when it comes to leadership is this lack of transparency. Listen, I know this. I'm not living in a utopian world where I don't recognize that as leaders, there's information that we can share, and then there's information that we have to think about the way we're going to share, right? And so sometimes I see this in leadership is when people haven't developed their skills around communication, they share everything, right? So they have a relationship maybe with their team members where they're oversharing, and it becomes more of like a friend to friend relationship. I'm going to tell you that can be very, very dangerous when it comes to leadership and leading people in healthcare. Like, you really have to look at things from that lens of how can you be fully transparent, how can you frame out your messages, and how can you prepare your people to receive those messages. That is all done through the prep work you're going to do in advance. That's you really sitting back and thinking about how am I going to make sure this lands the right way and that I'm giving enough information for that person. Right? You know this. It's like anything in life, right? We don't overshare all of our details. Have you ever been around somebody that overshares all of their details in life? Like not just a professional setting, but in a personal setting. It's sort of like really uncomfortable for the listener, right? Most people are like, all right, TMI, too much, right? So it's a balance and it's a blend. You have to create that space where you really are creating full transparency. The information that you're providing is accurate, it's genuine, it's completely focused on the individual, but it's received in a way that they're going to best do it. And that could be you doing it one-on-one. It could be you doing it in a team session, in a huddle, in a town hall. It really doesn't matter what it is. It's just that you are doing it. And don't forget about the trap that I often see sometimes in leadership, which is because we're so overloaded with emails, so often, many times as leaders, like all the niceties goes away and it's just like people are responding and they're really not reading or looking, or they're not thinking of how the person on the other end is going to take that communication. Unfortunately, we live in a litigious society. We have to think about our written words and what we say and how we say it, even our spoken words. Like all of that comes into play. And so giving yourself that time to make sure you're building your skills up and you're slowing down. I know it's really hard going through hundreds and hundreds of emails. I get it, but it's okay. Sometimes it really becomes like us as leaders here in Life School, we have to recognize that we don't necessarily always have to operate at a pace that is so fast, where we're missing the mark and missing the opportunity to make sure the communication is landing right. And I know I was guilty of this. I used to do this all the time. Boy, I'm thinking of a couple of my previous bosses that are probably sitting there laughing and giggling because they're like, did you ever see her emails? Boy, they used to be like novels, right? So we all have to learn this. I know for me, it's a work in progress. I'm always working on this, getting it down to that clear, concise point. I think one of the traps that I see in healthcare that you need to be fully aware of, you need to have a purposeful and intentional plan on, is making sure that information is going from top down, across, and from bottom back up. I mean, I see this as a failure in healthcare so often in so many settings, right? I mean, messages not getting down from senior leaders to the right people, and those messages sort of dying on the vine at sort of a management level because people are so overwhelmed, right? And it doesn't get down to the actual stakeholder that needs the information the most, the person that is directly affected by that communication. So don't forget to investigate the time into looking at that within your organization. Like, how does the communication flow? And if you're noticing that it's stopping at a certain point, why is that happening? Is it someone's ability to feel comfortable with sharing and pressing it down? Maybe that person hasn't developed the skills where they feel confident enough to be able to deliver that information or that message. And I see this a lot in healthcare, right? Because one of the most dangerous practices that I see is when somebody says, well, this isn't coming from me. This is coming from John. This is John's message, right? And that happens a lot, right? Because somebody isn't willing to be fully aligned with the direction going down. And so I'm going to remind you here in Life School, when you're a leader, part of that responsibility is we've got to get to a place where we're aligned in our key and core messages. Doesn't mean we all have to agree on everything, but the alignment is an essential piece. And I think about all the times in my leadership career where, I had the benefit of seeing the beauty of this when it was orchestrated perfectly, right? It was somebody at the top saying, all right, now before we sort of leave this meeting, we talked about so many things today, right? What are the core things that we are all committing to, we're agreeing to, and we are all going to make sure get pushed forward? Again, that creates alignment. It creates a sense of we are all moving as leaders in the same direction. And sometimes in the speed of healthcare, if you don't set that framework, if you don't set those expectations, if you don't talk about that openly, someone will not be able to share. And you will find yourself where favoritism starts to seep into your organization because maybe only certain key leaders are pulling information down and directing it to staff, and others are not even having those conversations. And so it's a way when it comes to leadership that we need to look inward. We need to really be laser focused to be looking at those communication chains and how they're forming and how they're going. And equally as important, and I will tell you, I feel like this is partially really like up there at the top, is one of the things that we often do not do when it comes to leadership is we forget the importance of communicating the why in our communications. The why is what anchors everything for your employees. And if you tie it to what's important to them, not necessarily to you, you are going to see a better traction in that message. You're going to see change. Because again, it's what's in it for the person. And if your messages are, we have to do this because of X, Y, and Z, my boss wants it, right? You're not going to see the traction. But if we're in the field of healthcare, and so many of our decisions, many of our communications, many of the things that we do are all directed to the patients that we provide care and services to, right? It's their quality of life. It's their improved outcomes. It's their ability to really trust and believe that when they show up and walk through our doors, they're going to get the care that they need. That does not come if you are not laser focused on how that communication is traveling down and that your people know the why behind different programs or what you're doing. You got to get them on board. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And it just reminds me of a time in my career where I had to manage multiple individuals. And I will never forget this. Again, a really dear mentor friend of mine, she said to me, I think, you really need to look at your team members, the staff that you were managing. And I was managing a lot of people at the time. And she said, I really want you to look at those people that are like 100% behind you, where, they're fully engaged. They will go to bat, they'll do whatever you need to do, and like they're here on this side, right? And then I want you to think about the people that are sort of on the fence, depending on the day, maybe they lean forward and they're all in, or maybe not. And she said, and then I want you to think about those people on the fringes, on the ends, where like you have to push them forward, like they are just not engaged or they don't want to be there, right? And she said, your job as a leader is to move those people that are on the fence in this direction. You want to get them to be fully engaged, and it's going to be you tapping in and making sure you are communicating in a way that inspires and motivates the individual. It's not the masses, it's the individual. And she said, and those that are really on the fringe and you're just not sure if they really want to be here, that's your open, honest, and difficult conversation where you let them know you are there to fully support them, but this is what you're seeing and this is what you want to see. And what can you do as a leader to move them and get them closer to being on the fence? Because that's a win if you can do that. And trust me, this is all done through practice over and over again and just being repetitive, right? Once you learn how to move people through your organization, through your communications, through your engagement, through your interactions, you're going to see a shift and a change in the way people respond to you. And that includes, as a leader, fighting the tendency to speak before listening. And listen, I know for me, this was one of my biggest challenges. I giggle at it because I almost feel a little bit embarrassed to actually state this, but I'm going to use it as a teaching opportunity because for me, this was something I had to do. I mean, I literally would put a question mark on a Post-it note and put it on my notebook, and I would go into a team meeting, and that was like my visual cue reminder not to say anything and just to ask questions and be the last person to speak. I mean, I really had to break it down to something as simplistic as that. And it's a little embarrassing, but I'm going to tell you, if it works for you and it helps you get there to where you become self-aware that this is your natural tendency, it's going to help you. Because what you can't have in the field of healthcare is one-sided communications. Like, you can't have a situation where you're just doing all the talking and it's not a two-way dialogue. And again, a very wise person once told me in my leadership career and in my leadership journey, as a leader, your team members should be talking more than you are. Because if they're talking more, that means as a leader, you've created that psychological safety net for them to feel like they're in a safe place where they can thrive and they can do the work that's important to them. And they can communicate to you in a way where it's a two-way street and it's open, it's honest, and it's fully transparent. And when you get there, you will start to notice it. And I will tell you, I think, don't forget when it comes to communication, there's a lot of opportunities as leaders that we really just fail to connect through our communication, right? And so in the simplest of terms, I'm going to remind you as a leader, you can find at least 5 things that you have in connection with your team members, right? You can do this as an interactive exercise. You can have a conversation to say, let's challenge each other and find the things that we have in common, right? So that we can create sort of a bridge where we can start having communications. And this is a really great skill if you're having trouble getting through to a person. And listen, we've all had those experiences as a leader where you're just not getting through, or you're seeing it that person isn't gelling or connecting with you. So there's a couple of things that you have to think of. Number one, always look inward. We have a tendency as humans to look outward and to start judging that person and why they are not responding to us. I'm going to tell you as a leader, don't do that. Please don't do that. Look inward at yourself. Like, examine the way you're communicating. Take that step back and really just think about it. Like, what could I do differently, right? And it could even be you having a very honest conversation with a team member to say, I notice that I feel like, we're not at that point where I feel like we can engage in this conversation where it just seems so natural and fluid. And that's where I want us to get to. I mean, I want to be that type of leader for you where, like, you can come in and no matter what's happening, you can say to me, like, Arlene, I need time just to vent, or Arlene, this is a real problem because I want to leave. And that is so critically important. That comes from creating that psychological safe space for your team members. So don't forget the importance of that. And don't forget the importance sometimes of just looking at it from the perspective of sometimes it's as simple as going back to basics, right? Like, we have all these assumptions that everything is happening for a particular reason. So it might be something as simple as just looking at it from a different perspective and, like, looking at it from that lens of, now, what am I missing here in this scenario? So if you're a leader and you're talking to your team members and you're just not at a place where you feel like that conversation, that communication is resulting in a change of behavior or actions, then again, go back to the basics. Like, what am I missing here? Like, am I not clear? Check. Okay. Yeah, I'm clear. Like I'm asking the right questions. I'm making sure they're hearing it, right? Like, what am I missing? Because I've seen this. There's been hundreds of times I've had this experience, even when I was consulting and working with healthcare organizations, and I would have conversations with people. Very oftentimes, even when I was having coaching conversations with leaders, they would say things to me like, like John is always late. Like I've done everything in my power to try to get this to change. I've written him up. Well, at first I gave him verbal warnings. I explained to him, I reset my expectation. This is what's needed. This is what we had to do. And then he didn't, he's still late. So then we got to write up. We 3 times write up, right? And now I'm at the point where I literally am going to have to terminate him. I have no other options left because he is not hearing my communication. And I will say to somebody, have you ever asked John why he's late? And they'll be like, no, I didn't. And I'm like, go back and ask John why he's late, right? And then come back and give me a call, right? And you would be surprised at what people learn just by doing that piece. Like, hey, John, it dawns on me, like, we've had so many conversations about your ability to be here on time. And I want to support you because I see something in you. Like I see that you love to do this work. I see that you're good at this, right? I see that this is what you were meant to do. But this lateness thing, it's really getting in the way. And for me to support you, I need to understand what's getting in the way. Like what's happening? Why are you late? Because for this individual that I had this conversation with one time, they called me and they were like, I want to die. And I was like, please don't die. Because we've all been there, right? We've all had these experiences, leaders. I'm like, what happened, right? And that natural sort of conversation was, once I opened that door and I had that very honest conversation, I quickly learned that John, lost his car. It was repossessed, and he was on the verge of losing his house. And he was relying on public transportation, and he had to take 2 buses to get here to work. And sometimes if he missed the one bus, he had to go on another, and that was the reason, right? And I remember saying to this leader, now what are you going to do about it? And he said, I'm going to work really hard at finding a way of how we can support John so that he gets to work on time, right? Because that shouldn't be his worry. And I think that is beautiful when it comes to leadership. I mean, imagine that is what you focus on and how you communicate and how you impact someone's life that's going through difficult times. And I'm going to remind you here in Life School, and when it comes to leadership, if you're a leader doing that, they will walk through fire for you. They won't leave for any situation because they know what they have. And I know that's hard to understand and comprehend because people really believe that it's always, always all about money. But sometimes when you're in a safe place and your basic needs are being met, you're going to create a space where your team members are going to continue to grow. I mean, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If our basic needs aren't being met, how can we even think about what our future is going to be like? And as a leader, you have the ability to support your team members by just engaging with them through conversations and creating that safe space for them to thrive, for them to share, for you to support them, for you to come together and figure out how you can keep this person in a role. Because believe me, I guarantee you as a leader, when you go to bat in those types of situations, you are going to feel like you are operating at your personal and professional best. I mean, you're going to know it. It's going to ooze out of your body because everybody in your organization will see it. They will notice it, and they will wonder, what does that person do and how are they doing it? Because boy, does that team love their leader. And that absolutely is 100% possible. And don't forget, in your communications, the same is true when you're talking about the peers that you work alongside with. making sure that that communication is flowing two-way, right? If you're withholding information that somebody else may need within your healthcare system, you're not going to make a lot of friends. People aren't going to want to trust you. You're going to lose credibility. And so you have to look inward and say, why am I doing that? Am I doing that just because I want to believe that most people do it because we're so busy and we're not thinking like all the different ways that we have to communicate, up, down, over, across. It's more like a big jungle gym. I mean, we have to make sure that everybody has the information they need to be able to do the great work that they were meant to do on this earth. And then don't forget, the way you communicate, the intention behind your words, the preparation, and the way you deliver it, and your laser focus on the how and the why, that will have a trickle-down effect on the way your team members communicate to the people that you serve. 100%, because they are experiencing you role modeling at your finest. That is what they're going to learn from. And again, we started off this podcast talking about the importance of really make sure as a leader, when it comes to your communication, you have a big strategic plan and that you're sticking to that. And if you're a high-level leader, you 100% need that strategic plan. But even if you're just a supervisor, you still need to know that bigger plan so that you can create your little plan around that big plan. So that when you're leading your team, you're marching them in the same direction. And that the outcomes that will come are going to be exactly aligned with the overarching organizational goals. Listen, I hope that you learned something important during this podcast, and I hope that you listen in to a future podcast for leaders. Goodbye, everyone.